Go.
Okay, you're live, Susan.
Great. Hi, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of the Biotensegrity Party. We are in season 2, episode 9, so this is 2.9. And today, coming to us from Toronto, Canada, we have special guest, Dr. George Roth, who will be telling us about his biotensegrity informed treatment modality of Matrix Repatterning. So my name is Susan Lowell de Solorzano. I'm coming to you from the United States colony of Washington, D.C.
My name's Graham Scarr, coming from Nottingham in sunny UK.
Hi, Graham. And I'm Chris Morita Clancy, coming to you from Deep Cove, just outside of Vancouver, BC in Canada. And today, I'd like to welcome all of you here. It's always great to see you. And to let you know that it's our intention to promote and share the biotensegrity concept with as many people as possible, and to include all of you in this mission. The Biotensegrity Party is an all-volunteer production of the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive, which is a not-for-profit organization whose mission is to educate, raise public awareness, and build community in the field of biotensegrity, as well as to foster and forward discovery, research, and understanding in the field of science, health, and medicine.
And introducing, thanks, Chris, today's volunteer team. We've got Lisa Babiuk from St. Albert in Alberta, Canada. Hey, Lisa.
Hi, everyone.
We've got Mariana Barreto from Mississauga, Ontario in
Hello,
Canada
everyone.
also.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Mariana. It's Canada Day, right? We've got Patricia Hopper from Seattle, Washington, which is near Canada, but in the United States.
Hi, guys.
And we've got Gregory Schutte from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Hey, Gregory. Gregory, you're coming up with a different name, so maybe you could fix your name there. Thanks. So we're going to begin by opening with a toast from George Roth. Over to you, George.
Well, I'm so delighted that you've invited me. Thank you very much. And I hope everyone can hear me okay. I would like to toast this amazing congregation of exciting leading edge thinkers. And I also especially want to toast my old friend and fellow Canadian. I think, Steve, you were actually born in Toronto for like a minute. And so my brother from another mother and all of his amazing entourage, here's to you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you. So we're going to pass it over to Graham for the sponsors. And if you're not part of the main panel, we're going to ask you to pop your video off so that things look better for the YouTube audience. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Our Biotensegrity Party is an all-volunteer production of the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive and made possible through the generous support of our sponsors. Our sponsors are really important for helping getting the message of the Tea Party out there. And they're offering a lot of discounts as well. Starting with Handspring Publishing in East Lothian, Scotland, have a wide range of authors and books available for movement and manual therapy professionals, and are offering a generous discount coupon to those on the Biotensegrity Archive mailing list. They also produce a free regular newsletter, which you can join from their website, and provides details of their webinar series with Elizabeth Larkham. Embodied Biotensegrity with Chris Morita Clancy in Vancouver, British Columbia, who provide an excellent resource for those of you looking to learn more about biotensegrity. Their 14-day free membership trial is only available until this coming Monday. So subscribe over the weekend and you can attend the next book club meeting for discussion on the unreasonable effectiveness of light touch with Leonid Bloom and Biotensegrity Trailblazers. Then we have Artifact Pro in Madrid, Spain, where you can find wonderfully constructed tensegrity models who also offer a discount coupon to our Zoom participants. Matrix Repatterning with George Roth, our guest, who runs courses and is our guest today. Integrated Biotensegrity in Alberta, Canada, with Lisa Babiak, who also runs regular courses. Pretensed in Holland, who now have a range of different tensegrities for sale and currently offering a whopping €50 discount on their 6-twist essentials model, which there are very few left. If you look at the chat in a moment, you'll see a link to their website where he shows you actually making the model. We have the Biotensegrity Congress coming from Brazil, which will be in Portuguese and English between April the 23rd to 25th, with a series of workshops for movement teachers and manual therapists. And the fasciahub.com, who are organising a full-day event entitled The Fascia Foot on Saturday, 8th of May, with John Sharkey, Wilbur Kelsick, Elizabeth Larkham, and Philip Beach, plus a somatic experiencing session with teacher Rachel Tudor, who will take you into engaging with your own feet and lead to a deeper awareness that informs both your practice and self-care. Early bird tickets at £35 are currently available only until the 5th of April. So if you're interested in going, look at the chat, find out the details and join them there. Thank you to our sponsors. Back to you, Susan.
Thanks, Graham. And Tea Party team, I just put in the WhatsApp the latest discount code from Ana Altsabo for the Brazilian Biotensegrity Congress. So I think that's good from now till April 23rd. So, George, it's so great to have you here. We've been waiting a long time to schedule this, and I'm so happy to finally get you here. I know you've got a lot of stories to tell. I think maybe you could start by telling us about how you came to discover biotensegrity. And, I don't know what's going on. Oh, there we go. Okay, now I've got you full screen. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Oh, for sure. And so my journey began a little bit before I discovered biotensegrity, and I met Dr. Levin, which was actually in 1992. But my journey started earlier in 1978 when I became a chiropractor, graduated chiropractic school, and then naturopathic school after that. And then I began realizing there were so many missing pieces to this puzzle. And so I actually had an injury myself when I was a child in a car accident, fairly serious car accident. And later in life, it became more aggravated. My back became an issue. And, I went to chiropractors and other people and really I wasn't able to get any relief. And then, so I started reading some work on osteopathy, and I started exploring osteopathy and studied with a number of osteopaths from France and the US, and wound up actually at an osteopathic hospital in Columbus, Ohio, because I wanted to study with one of the people down there. And so I spent 5 years traveling once a month for 3 or 4 days to the hospital, where I began working with and teaching with people related to Larry Jones, who developed counterstrain technique. And I wrote a book based on his work later on called Positional Release Therapy. But during all of that time, in all the studies I had done in osteopathy and chiropractic, there were still missing pieces. And I knew that everything I learned had some benefits, but there were also things that just didn't work consistently. And I literally remember in 1990, I remember literally calling out to the universe. I said, there must be a unifying principle. And it wasn't too long after that, there was a conference at York University in Toronto. It was organized by the Physical Medicine Research Foundation. I don't know if they still exist, but and so I was one of the speakers, and unbeknownst to me, Stephen Levin was there. And one of my students who I'd been teaching some of the work that I'd been developing, which came out of position release therapy, but I was struggling. And so I'll step one step back from that. in the osteopathic training I had, I discovered something very strange. And even before that in chiropractic school, I started noticing x-rays, and I taught human dissection and noticed there were these asymmetries in bone structure from one side to the other that were baffling. And I asked people about it. No one knew the answer to it. So I kind of put it aside. And then I remember I was doing an osteopathic technique where we compare fascial tension in one part of the body to the other. This is a technique called mechanical link that I was studying. And I remember that I was looking for these connections throughout the body, which was a very tedious process. And then, so I found an area of restriction, and I started to move my hand to another part of the body. And before I actually touched that part of the body, the area that I was tugging on to check for restriction let go. And I said, what the heck happened? And I couldn't explain it. And I started playing with this technique, and still I couldn't explain what was going on. I didn't understand this connection. I knew about kinetic chains, the anatomy trains. I've been connecting with Tom Myers. But at that time, this was prior to my meeting Stephen Levin.
So
anyway,
what year do you
this would have
think
been
that
back
was?
in the mid 80s. This would have been back in the mid 80s. And so eventually, as I said, 1990, I shouted out to the universe, there's got to be a unifying principle. And we were both teaching, and one of my students said, you got to sit in on Dr. Levin's lecture, which I did. And I went, oh my God, light bulb went on. And all of a sudden, I remember the line that I actually wrote about in my book, The Matrix Repatterning Program for Pain Relief, was that I'd been taking these baby steps in the dark, and I couldn't see where I was stepping, and you're hoping you land on solid ground. And when I heard Stephen speak and I listened to these concepts, it was like all the lights went on. Like there was this huge path that was lit up, and I just ran. I could run. I didn't have to take baby steps anymore because everything started to make sense. And I said, oh my God, this is incredible. And so from that point forward, I saw that this was an absolutely congruent model that I could use to develop what I was developing further. And the gratification for me was once these congruent concepts came into play, many of the people I was teaching were able to reproduce things much more easily. There was a consistency, there was a reproducibility, because it was based on something very, very solid. And for me, it was a godsend. And I don't think, to this day, I thank Stephen every time I do a presentation, and I just so much appreciate what he brought into my life. Anyways, the story goes after that. Stephen, I think you recall, you sat in on my lecture. We stopped, and when we met afterwards, and we gabbed for hours and talking about how, this might make sense, and how, you could explain to me even more clearly how, this would explain all the things I had been observing. And from that point on, it was just rocket ship straight up. So that was the basis. And it was originally called, when I developed this, I originally called it tensegrity therapy. But I was concerned at that early on, because I found out that the word tensegrity had sadly been trademarked by Carlos Castaneda, who I really enjoyed his writings when I was in the 70s, but I didn't understand why he took that word, and even though he didn't invent the word, he somehow got to trademark it. So anyways, long story short, I changed the name to Matrix Repatterning based on certain other criteria. But anyway, that's the history. From that point on, Stephen has kindly sat in and spoken to some of the groups I presented over the years. We've remained in communication. I remember joyful experiences with him down in Mexico, in Cozumel, where we explored the surroundings there while we had groups of people who were coming in to learn some of the things we were teaching. And so it's been a delight. So what I guess, yeah, that's my
I know
history.
for your name, George, was just one of the first that I heard, when I was first working with Steve years ago. And so I know that anybody who is trained in matrix repatterning, I know that they're informed about biotensegrity. I know that you've had Steve in many times over the years.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. No, to me, it's one of the greatest insights in my background is in clinical practice. I do some clinical research. I'm doing a research project now with a teaching hospital in Toronto. My background though is applying things clinically, and I tell you that from my point of view, this model, this understanding of how it applies to the human body, is to me one of the most important insights, at least in the last century, in medicine, in my opinion. And we have seen, and I'll describe some of the things that we've been able to document, from X-ray findings to laboratory changes to cardiac function. I mean, it's remarkable when these principles are applied. So it's been such an exciting journey for me.
That's great. And so should you give us a little kind of definition of matrix repatterning, or is that part of the presentation?
Yeah, it'll be part of my presentation. So I'll do my best. It's been a challenge. It's always asked of me, what is matrix repatterning? And that is always a $64,000 question, although now the inflation has caught up and it's a little more expensive, but anyways.
Well, we did. I know you were there a few weeks ago and we did what is biotensegrity, and there were so many answers and people were saying, wait, we just need one short answer.
Remember, yeah.
It's that you can't do that.
It's
really
because
hard.
it's everything. It's everything. From, as Steve says, from viruses to vertebrates to really the universal space frame that we're living in, water, soil, everything is tensegrity. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Or in biology, biotensegrity. So yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think we've got you set up so you can share your screen whenever you're ready.
I will do my best to attempt that.
Great.
Let me see. Here we go. I think I figured it out. All right, here we go. Okay.
That looks great.
Looks good so far. Let me see if I can get it moving again. I remember I had a little challenge starting it up. There we go. So matrix repatterning, interestingly enough, I came up with this name sort of intuitively, but it's interesting that when you look at the origin of the word matrix, it comes from the Latin word mother, and the word pattern comes from the Latin word father. So it's that's something that didn't dawn on me till after the fact, because I love words, but I didn't really plan on that, right? And so the symbol up on the left corner there is sort of this idea of the matrix creating this powerful ripple effect into everything that we do, right? So that was the idea behind that. And so we talk about matrix repatterning as restoring health from the inside out. And really this goes right down to the molecular level, the cytoskeleton, the extracellular matrix, which is really how everything works. And so this is one form, and every form of intervention that we use is an application of biotensegrity, in my opinion, whether we know it or not, right? And this is just one. So matrix repatterning is, we've developed it into what I believe to be an objective therapeutic system, and of course, based on biotensegrity. It recognizes that many common injuries are absorbed by dense tissues. So one of the things I talk about is if you bang on a pillow, it's absorbed by the dense fabric. If I bang on my desk here, you can hear it. And part of that is there's a density, and the way tissue responds to energy transmission is that the denser structures in our body are more subject to injury because they absorb the energy of the injury itself, whether it's impact or strain. So I've looked closely at the skeletal framework because I knew there were changes going on that I had observed over the years. But I also recognized through my work in osteopathy that many of the dense fluid-filled organs were also absorbing a lot of these injuries, and that's the nature of an internal injury, for example, derived from a fall or a car accident, for example. And so I think density plays a role in how the body absorbs the energy of an injury. So the assessment we use is looking at several factors. There are structural changes, there are biomechanical changes, and bioelectric changes, which we can measure. Treatment is very gentle because we're using the leverage of knowing where things are and being able to use the leverage of the tensegrity, the biotensegrity nature of tissue. And I think, Graham, you mentioned this presentation on the power of light touch. This is explained by some of the things that I'll be talking about and why biotensegrity creates that leverage. Our outcomes are measurable. So we've had, in every one of our classes, we have a clinical portion which is double-blinded. So we have intertester reliability measured by the students during that framework so that they can actually determine their findings and then have a second person come in who doesn't know the original tester's findings, and they come up with remarkably the same findings through these measurements. So, and this is why we've been invited to do research, because we have been able to demonstrate some of these objective changes in physiological issues like blood pressure, cardiac rhythm, liver function, and so on. Not to mention the biomechanical issues, of course. So when I talk about impact, one of the ways of looking at this, I mentioned earlier with dense tissue, is, you can look at a car being in an accident. You look at the body is crumpled and, things are falling off and everything else. But the deeper injuries are what's important and where that energy goes. So when you think of someone being in a car accident, if you don't go deep enough, you're going to miss things like the fact that the frame is actually damaged. And so in order to determine that, you have to be able to find a way to look at the frame and focus in on a deeper perspective. Can you see the slides okay, everyone? Is that working? Just want to make sure.
Yeah, they look great.
That's great. I have a bar here that's in my way. I'm just going to move it out of the way if I can. I wonder if I can minimize that. Oh, let's try that. Okay, good. Okay, so now let me see if I can continue. Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, so biotensegrity, of course, was the big breakthrough for me. People like Stephen and Donald Ingber, who I learned about after the fact, looking at the cell structure and some of the work he had done, and others, of course, people like Gerald Pollack and fluid dynamics, all of that has come into play in my thinking. And really, it comes down to this deep structure, which is the framework inside the cells and between cells, which is the extracellular matrix, and how that essentially is a hardwired system designed in a spatial relationship that's determined by the structure, and everything works beautifully until it doesn't. And injury changes things. So speaking about dense tissue is basically a greater concentration of molecular material, and it transfers energy from a force application much more readily from one molecule to another. So absorption in something that's relatively dense, like the skeletal framework, is something that I noticed even before I discovered biotensegrity, in the fact that something was happening to bone, and believe it or not, it caused bone to get bigger. And Stephen finally explained that to me based on what his understanding of the actual space frame of, within the geodesic, the framework inside the cytoskeleton, that when it changes to an injured state, it can expand in all directions, which is exactly what I noticed in bone and other areas of the body. So you talk about enlarged hearts, enlarged spleens, enlarged kidneys, and so on. These are all things that are real and happen because of this. So the challenge is life on planet Earth, falls and impact trauma. I often blame Isaac Newton for this, for inventing gravity. If it hadn't been for that, I think we'd be much better off. But nevertheless, here we are in this wonderful environment. And so for those of you who, you can look at this yourself, you can see these changes in your own body. In a minute, I'll get you to run through a little exercise here. So bone is this material That's actually mineralized fascia, as I call it. It's a simplification, of course, but it's basically got a collagen framework that has hydroxyapatite crystalline structure, cell structure, and fluid compartments and things which channel ions and so on. It's a very, very dynamic structural material which is deformable and plastic in nature and responds to injury in a dramatic way. I call it the forgotten fascial element. So injuries leave clues, okay? So when we look at bone, and one of the things I looked at early on was this expansion, and then I came across the work of Paul Hansma. I know, Steve, you're aware of this. He talked about this glue-like material between the trabeculi that he's able to observe, and with injury, it expands, and after injury, it remains larger than the original structure of bone. And I believe this happens not only in this glue-like material, I believe it happens throughout the framework of bone, but I'm not sure about that. All I can tell you is that bone gets bigger with injury. And so for that, I'm going to ask you guys to do a little exercise here. Just for the moment here, what I'd like you to do is just have a look at both of your knees and place your hands on either side of your knees on the outside, like that, and have a look at the size difference between what we call the femoral epicondyles. This is an awareness of just the size difference. Using your hands as calipers, you might notice that there is a little bit of a difference, okay? If you bring your thumbs together afterwards, I've actually injured my left knee now, so my left one is a little bigger. I haven't gotten to fix it yet. I had a fall a few weeks ago, and I know it's been bothering me. So silly me, I haven't treated it, but it's definitely treatable and reversible. So, so those are the kinds of things you might notice that if you look at your shoulders, just look at the humeral head. You can look at that. I'll introduce my friend over here. This is Napoleon over here. Okay, you can see him on this on my little screen there. So yeah, Napoleon is his last name is.
We can see nose to elbow.
Nose to elbow.
That's what we're seeing of Napoleon.
Oh, nose to elbow.
Yes.
Good. That's fine. Yeah, all you have to do is look here. But his full name is that's his first name. His last name is Bonaparte. So, so you're looking at the shoulders. We can see those changes. You can see that in the knee. You'll see that in the epicondyles here quite often, or the patella. So those are the kinds of things that I noticed on X-rays, and I noticed those on when I taught dissection at the chiropractic school, and also in other observations, that these were actually changes that were noticeable and measurable. And once I realized, the principles of biotensegrity, I was able to significantly change those enlargements. And that changed everything, because these bone changes are actually going to impose themselves on the surrounding fascia. And so what we see is that the fascial tension causes pain, and the periosteum becomes painful, of course. It changes the mechanics of joints, because now you have parts that are not designed properly. They're the wrong size to fit the articular structure. I believe it can incite things like wear and tear on articular structures and so on. So I think it is an important part of what we are observing clinically. So that is something that we'll talk about a little bit later. We'll certainly answer questions. So the articular misalignment that a lot of chiropractors, I don't know if there are any chiropractors in the audience, but a lot of chiropractors look at vertebrae and are palpating these, what they think are rotations or misalignments of vertebrae. But in fact, this is a cast of an actual C1, the first vertebra in the cervical spine. And when you look at it, you'll notice that the right articular process here is actually larger than the left side by a significant amount. We measured this one at exactly 2 millimeters in every direction, okay? in the Z-axis here, the X-axis, and in the Y-axis.
2 millimeters greater than the other
Greater,
side
yes, exactly.
in
The
every
difference
direction.
in size, exactly, every direction. And this is something when you look at a good skeleton, whether it's real or it's cast from a real skeleton, you'll see these changes all the time at many, many levels in the long bones. You'll see it in the joints, in the hip joint, the femoral head. You'll see it depression, injuries, changes in the bone structure in the rib cage and the skull. And these are things we know we can change that, because rather than trying to manipulate this, we actually release the tension here. And actually, we've had chiropractors comment on the fact that, they've been adjusting or treating this area forever. And with one treatment with matrix repatterning, this is gone. It's perfectly symmetrical. All right. And it's done very gently with no risk, no force. Okay. So, and this is something I'll show you some x-rays afterwards that demonstrate that as well. Okay.
Wonderful.
Okay. Now, so normalization of bonsai. This is an example of one of those cases. Now, this was a great opportunity. The challenge with demonstrating bone size changes on X-ray, for those of you who've used X-rays, is positioning is critical. Because if you position a bone away from the film, even slightly, you're going to get an artifact which is confounding. It's not going to be a true representation of bone size. So fortunately, we had this incredible opportunity about 10 years ago where a young fellow who, a 15-year-old hockey player, this is a close-up of his left knee. And so what they were measuring very precisely using absolutely reproducible measurements for the bone, because he had a genetic condition in which bone changes were being gauged closely because of this genetic condition they were worried about. So they measured this to within a tenth of a millimeter of size difference. And so what they found that the left knee was fully 5 millimeters larger at the level of the tibial plateau and the femoral distal head here. Okay. So that was before treatment. And this is now, we did 6 treatments and then he was re-x-rayed. And this was done by those same surgeons, the same radiologists. So after treatment, they were able to measure an absolute change in size after the treatment. Not only that, but if you look closely, not only did it alter the bone size, it started opening up and leveling out the joint space, which is significant. So for him, his parents were commenting that he was hobbling up the stairs and it was so painful for them to observe him. And after treatment, he was flying up the stairs and he never looked back. So this is approximately 5 millimeters. I think it was 4.85 millimeter difference, according to the radiologist after 6 treatments. So that to me allowed him to develop more pain-free function and allowed the joint to recover. So that's one of the great opportunities we had many years ago. It's a challenging thing to get good radiographs like that. Other things, I have other x-rays, which I don't know if I have them later on, but things like fractures that realign properly and so on. We've had radiologists comment on fractures that they couldn't believe. The fact that it was such a new fracture. They thought it was an older fracture because it was almost healed after treatment. They could barely find the fracture line in some cases. The other area I talk about is dense fluid-filled structures because they're vulnerable to impact as well. This changes the fascial, dense fascia around those, which can transmit into the organ and around the trunk and rib cage and so on. So this is a impact. This is a base hydrostatic forces that are generated through impact trauma that affect organs, organ size, organ function, which we've measured. It also is significant with respect to a head injury because this is a dense bony framework that surrounds a fluid compartment. And so a combination of the fluid surrounded by dense material is why this is such a vulnerable area to concussion. And of course, the dense packed neurological material makes it even more critical in terms of its repercussions clinically. So those are the areas that we've looked at. And now one of the ways I eventually recognized, I go back to my comment before about looking at fascial relationships and how when I placed my hand close to the area that I was about to test, it actually let go. It caused a release of tension through what I call the fascial matrix, which is this, the biotensegrity matrix of the body. And so I couldn't explain it until I looked at piezoelectricity and the role of bioelectricity and how we're generating electricity in our body. So piezoelectricity is basically a function of structure and electrical potential held within certain materials. And things like metals, ceramics, and bone have been studied for their piezoelectric properties. So when you change the shape of those structures, those crystalline structures, they become resistors or capacitors or conductors based on the shape of that structure. And likewise, if a electromagnetic field is applied to them, they also will deform in relation to the applied field. So both of those factors, both the crystalline structure and the mechanical deformation and the presence of or the alignment of a bioelectric field to it alters the actual mechanical properties. So it's like two sides of the same coin, is my understanding. And I'm not a scientist. I'm a scientist in the sense of clinical sciences, but I tried to explore this from the point of view of trying to explain my observations, right? So the idea then, when you deform a structure and you compress it, you get a generation of current. Likewise, applying a normalizing magnetic field deforms the structure and vice versa, okay? So this is a combination of factors which we've been able to apply to our work. So this article here, I can't read it because I've got something behind it. Mechanoelectric transduction in bone is one of the references I've referred to. And so Dr. Chakalal is with the Veterans Department in the US. He reported this back in 1989. A number of findings, including looking at cells in living bone are embedded in a charged inorganic solid permeated by ionic fluids flowing through a complex network of channels. So this allows the movement of ions back and forth between cells. And it's likely that the physiology of bone depends on its electrical and electromechanical properties. And this was shown to be true in another study, which I don't have here, but showed that when bone is injured and it changes shape, its dielectric properties are reduced. It doesn't conduct electricity the same way. So we know that there is some influence of injury affecting the conduction of electricity through bone. So contrary to earlier perception of bone as insulating material, it's now recognized that it is endowed with physiologically significant conductivity. And so this mechanoelectric transduction, because of this fluid and solid interface, is very important. And I think it plays into what I observe clinically. And so, this is essentially the idea that the application of mechanical stress alters the electrical potential of bone. And that is one of the reasons that we believe that we're able to detect these changes in tissue. I'm sorry, I'm going to step out of that for a moment because I put a slide in the wrong place. But the thing about this issue with, actually, I'll come back to that slide in a minute. I apologize. I'm going to just check something here, see where I am. Okay, let me go back to that. I'll come back to that in a moment. All right, I was trying to revamp the slides. Okay, so this slide here talks about strain patterns, how the mechanical forces of an injury are transmitted from one part of the body to another through the extracellular matrix and through the cytoskeleton. And I think with some of the previous group, I did a quick exercise. I'd like you to do one more exercise with me if you would. So for that, I'm going to get you to just sit quietly and kind of just close your eyes for a minute and feel the level of tension in your neck and shoulders. All right. And just observe that. And then relax your arms on your lap. And then while you're observing that level of tension with your eyes closed, I'd like you to clench both your fists. All right. and then relax your fists. And do that a couple of times and just observe the sense or the awareness of tension in this area, which is a very sensitive area. And so you may notice that there's a change there. Most people can feel that increase in tension that's transmitted from the fist, which I would refer to as the artificial restriction that we've created through muscle voluntary control. However, as Stephen has talked about many times, we don't generate any kind of activity just in one part. It's a non-local, complete involvement of the entire matrix. And it's also for that reason that an injury in one part of the body is appreciable and affects many other mechanical areas of the body and can alter biomechanics and pain in other areas. Okay, so matrix repatterning, how does it work? So using this concept of the transmissibility of mechanical force and the bioelectric properties, understanding the bone and deep fascia store the energy of injuries in a kind of almost like a fossilized record of the injury, because it absorbs more of it, it alters the framework there. So that basically, all of those properties come together as we objectively assess the individual. So we look for changes like structural change, that means the bone size differences. We look for these bioelectric changes, which I'll describe in a moment, so using these principles. And we also check for objective signs, things like ranges of motion. These are biomechanical issues. Joint stability, which is another unique concept here in terms of how the body creates joint stability, joint instability to actually protect itself, remarkably. And also things like just fascial tone, myofascial tone, and so on. Local tenderness is another clue that there is a local injury as well. All of these factors come into play as we assess our patients and help us to determine a proper diagnosis or assessment of where the source of the injury is, because pain and the source of the injury are often very different. So we look for these bone changes, for example. We can see them in various sites, the shape of the skull, the shape of the rib cage, the pelvis, the long bones, the epiphyses, the curvatures of the spine. All of these things are noticeable when you begin looking for them, and you'll see these differences, right? So bone size, we teach our practitioners to measure them very precisely. We use calipers, we can use tape measures and so on to compare as best we can. It's not an absolute science because we're doing it through, the superficial tissues, but it's still significant enough that it is often very measurable and even noticeable by the patient. So the electromagnetic influence, the first thing I discovered by accident, as I mentioned, when I placed my hand near an area, eventually I realized as I studied more of these bioelectric properties, is that the hand is something that has a lot of nerve endings. If you feel the palm of your hand, it's very sensitive to touch compared to, let's say, the forearm or other areas. So there's a lot of concentration of nerves here, and nerves are essentially cellular conductors of electricity, and anything producing electrical current does produce a field. This is one of the reasons we think that, the first thing you do when you bump your elbow or your knee or something, you're going to put your hand over it, it soothes it, it feels better. We think one of those effects might be the electromagnetic influence, right? So the idea of an induction coil, looking at applying a normalizing electrical field, whether it's the hand or otherwise. One of the person who wrote the foreword to my book on Matrix Repatterning, James Oshman, talks a lot about this in his book, The Scientific Basis, Energy Medicine, the Scientific Basis. He talks about electrical fields and induction and so on. And so that for me, explains some of these things that we're observing. So since the introduction of matrix repatterning, we were using the hand to basically determine these things, and those are things that you can actually learn for yourself. My book, which I'll talk about later, is available still, and that shows you some of the ways you can do that for yourself. And these create what are called the electronic fingerprints, detecting the electronic fingerprints. And one of the people we're working with currently, David Musin, currently associated with the University of Bologna, but was with MIT. He's one of the leading experts in the biological effects of electromagnetic frequencies on tissue. And he's been influential in developing some of the technology we're currently using, which is this unique device, which is called an alternating polarity concentric magnet, which is basically, as you can see, alternating polarities, which creates what we think is a cascading bioelectrical effect similar to a moving current, right? And so this is something that we're speculating on, because when I discovered this device, a rudiment or an early form of it, which we developed, I couldn't believe the effect when we placed it on the body. It caused immediate relaxation of tissue. And so it seemed to have a positive biological effect, which we've been able to use not only in our assessment, but also our treatment. Okay, so there are four double-blind studies on an earlier version of this that have shown pain modulation as well, okay, through 4 different university institutions. Those are all double-blinded, okay? So we've developed that technology with the company since then, and we use it in our work to assess these findings. So the bioelectric assessment then consists of applying this bioelectric field to different parts of the body as we monitor changes in tissue tension in another part of the body. We can use that because everything is interconnected through this, what we call the matrix, which is really this biotensegrity interconnection of the complete kinetic chain throughout the entire body. So we call that the scanner, that device that we use on the body. There's a more recent version of it, which looks like that. I'll hold it up to the camera. It's upside down. There you go. We call it the Matrix Mag, and it's encased in a silicone protector. It's a very, very powerful magnet. It's a rare earth magnet, so it's extremely powerful, and that's been really helpful in our process. Any other part of the body we use to determine the presence of a primary, we call that a primary restriction, will cause the indicator area to relax. So here's what happens. So I'm going to stand up for a moment, and I'll get you to look at my trunk here. You can see my sweater here. And so if there's an injury at any part of the body, it creates a source of tension. But because of that strain pattern, as I showed in an earlier slide, traveling through the body, I might develop shoulder pain or neck pain, other areas that are compensating for that. And so the clinical presentation doesn't tell me where it's coming from. But if I place the scanner over that area, it causes that area to relax. And another area will then let go. Often the symptomatic area will improve. So for example, there may be an improvement in tissue tone, but also an improvement in range of motion, and other things like joint stability will improve and so on. So it's remarkable. It's an instantaneous response. It takes not more than 2 seconds to be detectable. So it's quite a helpful tool that allows us to assess the entire body. So our assessment then, we look at roughly 36 sites, potential sites of injury. It can be anywhere, of course. These are the most common areas of injury that we look for during our assessment. And so we place the scanner over each of these areas and monitor the change in tissue tone, which allows us to recognize that that site that caused the tissue to relax is likely one of those sources of tension. Then we can extrapolate back. We use measurements like, as I said, ranges of motion. We also look at, for example, joint stability. I'll come back to that. It's a little more complicated. Something that I discovered that a primary in certain areas will cause stabilizing muscles to turn off. And I believe it's a protective mechanism. And unfortunately, when you have an unstable joint like a knee or a shoulder or low back, that really causes significant deterioration and degeneration of the joint structures. And until you reestablish stability, you're basically fighting a losing battle. You can't exercise these muscles. So, for example, a primary in, let's say, the spine or the head or the trunk will cause the semimembranosus to turn off. The popliteus will turn off. You can't exercise those muscles. And so essentially, we found a way to turn them back on by correcting the related primary restriction. So that shows up in the knee.
George,
Yeah.
George, if I just may, well, you were saying a primary.
Yeah, so let me go back to that.
A primary
A
restriction.
primary restriction, yes. So we define that, my apologies, I didn't define that for you. We refer to a primary restriction as a site of structural and bioelectric measurable change in the body that represents a tissue injury that we believe affects things right down to the cellular and the molecular level in the cytoskeleton. So that is what we call a primary restriction, okay? Whereas another restriction may be secondary because it's, like I said, with my sweater analogy here, this injury here, pulling on my sweater, it causes the shoulder to restrict. That's not a primary, that's a secondary restriction, okay? But clinically, the person may have shoulder pain, but they forgot about the fact that months or years ago, they fell on their hip, causing a primary. But the problem with that is the brain will adapt to those old injuries over a period of time. And so you forget they're there, all right, after a while. So for example, okay, very good, thank you. And a good example of that is, let's say if you, I just want to watch my time here. How are we doing? Oh, I'm running way over. Okay, I'll zip through here. Okay, I'll answer that in questions. I apologize. Yeah, this always takes longer than I think. I'm going to skip through these. These are other areas of joint stability. We call them sacrificial joints and the articular stability reflex. So demonstrating objective changes. We can see those changes, which I alluded to earlier. Those are things that our practitioners have been able to verify. I see some of our practitioners are on this presentation today, which is nice to see. So with matrix repatterning, we can answer those questions. Where is it coming from and how to treat it? So those are things that our practitioners are able to do to provide solutions and get objective changes through all of these different types of techniques. And okay, let's go back here. Treatment is basically just gentle pressure, which we use to align those structures to induce that same piezoelectric effect and release the tension. And we can actually measurably see those changes in real time, quite often normalizing the size and shape of bone structures, for example, sometimes in a matter of minutes, okay? So restoring range of motion, turning on joint stability, okay? Other changes like with low back, looking at the source of them, very common problem. But many of these other primary sites can lead to that because the low back is an area that's often unstable. For example, the lower lumbar spine is often unstable. So spinal alignment before and after scoliosis changes. This is one treatment. This is an interesting case. Really quickly here, one of my students treated this person with degenerative changes in the bone. They had to there's a rod in the bone because it had spontaneously fractured and several times. And this is 6 treatments later, normal, healthy bone. The radiologist couldn't believe it. And this person had been walking with assistive devices for 5 years before this intervention. And he says, I mean, he's a massage therapist, does matrix repatterning, and he says anyone could have done this using the principles. This is the anterior view, before and after treatment. And then the lateral view, now finally the rod has been removed. And this person, this young person now, I think she's 16 now, is finally got the rod out that's been there, been poking through. The rod was a mess. It's not a beautiful looking bone, but it's functional at this point. All right, so that's an example. Unnecessary surgeries. So we've been able to help people avoid knee and hip replacements. Concussion. Some of you may know of Dr. Norman Deutsch. I won't talk about all the studies we've done with the University of North Carolina on concussion, but Dr. Deutsch started investigating this quite a few years ago, and then wrote in his book about how important it was to have a matrix assessment following a head injury. and his hope that it would be in emergency departments based on what he was able to observe through interviewing many patients and actually watching treatments take place and studying the process himself. Okay, so many issues that we've been able to solve. It's crazy after a while. It's like, but all because of biotensegrity, all of it, everything, right down to the last thing we do, day in, day out. I give thanks to Stephen and this model, which is no way in a million years we could have achieved these results. Helping the puzzle pieces fit. That's really what it's about. And noticing that these changes are actually reversible, which is pretty exciting. Stephen wrote the foreword to my first book in '95, which I talk a little bit about tensegrity in as well. And then my recent book, which is available through New Harbinger, and it's on Amazon. And that's a basic self-help book, but I'm working on a new one as well. So if you're willing to wait, I hope to have that out later this year. And then there's, of course, we have an educational program, which I won't belabor here, for practitioners. If there are practitioners here, you can ask me about that as well. But we have a lot of online learning now. Thankfully, we have everything videotaped. And so you have an amazing video library that allows us to teach this work to many, many people. And I know Susan, the other day you were asking about patients being able to learn this. Yes, I'm motivated to get back into that. I used to teach some self-help courses, and that'll come with the new book. We'll have that out there and make sure that we can provide even better tools for people to apply these principles. Okay, that's it from me.
So that's wonderful.
Right.
So I'm going to ask a couple things, George, while
Let me stop sharing here.
Yeah, while our volunteers are helping to get other questions into the chat, but
okay.
I want to know how widespread this is at the moment. How many people and how distributed throughout the world?
Yes.
Because
okay,
people
well,
are going to be saying, how can I get this done?
Sure. Yeah, well, it's been a slow rollout. Currently, we have just over 100 practitioners certified in North America. Since we started the online program, which we started introducing slowly before the pandemic, and we were 70% online just then, and then boom, it hit. We're now 90% online. We have students studying it now in the pipe to become certified in Germany, in Sweden, in New Zealand, in Australia. I think someone joining us from Italy now. So there are people who are developing in other parts of the world. Right now, North America is the primary area. So if you go to the website, you'll find those practitioners on our website. Find a practitioner, just click on that and see if you can find someone near you.
Great.
Other than that, we're trying to get as many people educated as possible because it's just so exciting and it's so delightful to share it. And the feedback from students is they just can't believe what they can do now, to make changes in people's lives. So that's what's so exciting.
That's great. I just you had mentioned Jim Oshman, good friend to many of us here. And I just wanted to let people know, anybody who's catching up with the tea parties, that in the first season, Carol Davis interviewed Jim for, I believe it was episode 25. So you can find that on the Biotensegrity Archive YouTube channel. George, people are wanting to hear more about concussion. And this is such a, fast changing, hot and interesting topic. Our perceptions are different. Leonid was talking recently about the sort of the model we end up having of the sort of skull as a shell that is kind of inert and is sitting there to protect the squishy brain inside like an egg, and how our concepts are just so wrong.
Yeah. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. But, the reality is, a momentary event like a concussion, there are mechanical forces transmitted deep into the brain. However, there are lasting effects from changes to the shape of the skull. And many of you, if you just feel the shape of your head, you'll feel areas that are maybe more bulged on one side. You may have flat spots on an area. Back of the head is very common, the top of the head. And these are areas that actually remain imprinted into the shape of the skull. That, we believe, alters the mechanics that are transmitted through the meninges to the neural tissue, because we know we can measure almost immediate improvement in things like vestibular ocular motor testing, hearing. We've actually restored hearing in people. We can improve things like deep tendon reflexes, pathological reflexes. And this has been documented using a device called the Brain Gauge from the Biomedical Research Department at the University of North Carolina. Dr. Mark Tommerdahl evaluated that a number of years ago. Dr. Deutsch, as I said, has evaluated patients pre and post treatment with Matrix. So those are the kinds of changes that you can actually see. They're visible. Patients can feel those changes. It's quite dramatic.
And even after several years.
It seems to be something that can be introduced at any time. And what's interesting to me, I had a patient from an Indian young fellow, and his mother, who's actually got me involved with Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto on research because I helped him recover from a concussion. And that is, his grandmother was there one time and had commented that in traditional cultures I'm trying to remember where they were in India, but they would, as soon as the baby was born, they would start molding its head, because through the birthing process, there are these forces that are transmitted and they restore symmetry to the head. And I guess it's a cultural thing, but in my opinion, that's exactly what they were doing. They were actually improving in conditions in the head and likely the brain, and that's exactly what we do. And it's very gentle like that. And it's amazing how it can still be done at any point in life.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
We have questions coming up in the chat now and a lot of thank yous. I have just 2 points I want to make sure I got right. You were saying that the size of bone, because we think of bone as being very slow, changing over months and months and months, and you're saying in minutes, this kind of auxetic quality where it's inflamed and expanded, it's
nonlinear. According to, like as Steve says, it's nonlinear. It's an instantaneous change. I've seen it happen. I remember I was skiing one time and I fell and I drove my hand into my pole, and I immediately I looked at my metacarpal here, and it was like, whoa, it's huge, right? And I treated it. But the thing is, those changes are nonlinear, they're instantaneous. The other part is linear. That's Wolff's law that changes over time. As those mechanical forces are transmitted to the periosteum, there will be calcific and osseous changes over time. And that, of course, becomes an issue over time. So the sooner we can correct these things, the better. But even without that, there is some gradual improvement. You saw the young lady who 5 years post-injury had absolutely lost bone integrity. They called it fibrous dysostosis, and they thought it was genetic condition. And it was completely reversed within 6 treatments. So
again, thank you for being patient, chat people who have questions. But the other thing I wanted to find out, that concentric alternating current magnet.
Yes.
Is that commercially available?
Alternating polarity. There are some versions of it that are commercially available. We are coming up with a home treatment version of it right now, which we'll be rolling out within the next 6 to 8 weeks. It is amazing. It is truly amazing. It's been around, the technology has been around since the mid 80s. It kind of languished for a long time, developed in Germany. And I discovered it by accident. I said, wow, this magnet is like every other magnet I've ever used, literally shut down the matrix. It creates tension. If you're wearing any magnets, folks, I'll tell you right now, they are not helping you. A regular magnet, literally, it's like putting your foot on the brakes and the accelerator. That's because our tissues are designed to function with Earth's magnetic field, which is unipolar. This simulates a unipolar effect going through it, which is remarkable. There's nothing like it. And that's why I almost abandoned magnets completely. I tried testing all of them, and no matter what I tested, everything created tension. As soon as I put this on the body, it caused relaxation. Wow. And because of that, I believe it has a therapeutic effect, which people are noticing, with pain mitigation. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm going to ask Carol Davis to unmute in just a minute.
Yeah, and to get
I'll
those,
just-
basically the home treatment version, just contact, you can contact me, and we have a team that's developing that right now. So they should be at a very reasonable cost, and they're very, very helpful. And this will be part of the new book, and talking about how you can actually help yourself using that and some of the mechanical approaches we can teach individuals as a first aid approach. Yeah.
And Steve, I see you on camera. Did you want to pipe in?
Well, I was just thinking that it fits right into Jerry Pollack's Easy Water electrical system. So I'm sure there's an overlap there.
Oh, I totally believe it. I mean, to me, there's so many things that fit together now, that we couldn't make sense of any of this before. But now we finally have something that allows us to at least speculate on these different properties, It's just fantastic. Yeah.
I have to say, my great grandmother's little brother was the neighborhood kind of do everything, heal everything kind of guy. And I didn't meet him until I was in my 20s. Mm-hmm. And he had a bunch of things in the car, depending on what he needed to do. But he had one jar of zinc plates that he had cut out from old ice boxes, and one jar of copper plates. And when people had any kind of problem, he'd give them one of each and have them put one in one shoe and one in the other. And so I'm just hearing about this.
He's right on. And we have been using, prior to these magnets, we were using a small pulse magnetic field generator. They work really well too. And that he was accentuating the polarity, I think, to create our body generates microcurrent. And that's what Dr. Chakala was talking about with bone. Bone is just really measurable, but the whole body does that. The whole body is bioelectric,
Carol Davis, did you want to come on camera and unmute? And I know you've got a couple of questions and comments.
Yeah, George, that was a great presentation. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. And I'm very excited about it because, of course, I and maybe many of us are already deciding how we're going to use this for our own bodies. But I was curious about what you think is happening at the cellular level when you're locating that primary restriction and you're putting the alternating current magnet or your hands on what do you?
Yeah, let me illustrate that. Let me illustrate what I think. Okay, and Steve, you're gonna have to correct me. I know you're on my case a lot of times when I try to talk about these things, but I think there's some validity to it, perhaps. So when we talk about a normal tensegrity structure, the cytoskeleton, everything's nice and flexible, baseline tone, it's great. Now, an injury, in my opinion, whether it's a significant strain or an impact, somehow that energy is absorbed into tissue. The more dense the material, the more I believe it does absorb that. So, for example, tissue then absorbs the energy of the impact and it remains. And I think Ingber talks about linear stiffening, but it's really global expansion stiffening. It's in all directions, right? And Steve has helped me understand that. So I believe, and I'll just illustrate this. So here is a normal structure. This is injured, it's expanded, right? Now, when we place the normalizing magnetic field close to it, the piezoelectric influence causes it to come closer to normal. That takes that level of tension out of the system. Now, mechanically, we can also induce that by applying gentle pressure, okay? This is bringing the molecular structure a little closer together. I believe that creates a little improvement in potential for electrons to make that gap, because I think there are gaps in the conductive properties that are restored through pressure. And we know that in bone, we can do that. It's piezoelectric in nature, so applying gentle pressure can generate more current. And I believe that current displaces a static charge where electrons are stuck like a capacitor and causes current to flow through it, which is how our body should be, which releases the localized tension. That's my theory. I have no idea because I don't know how to measure it. I don't know if anyone does, but that's my working model for how this changes. And when it comes back to this, it stays this way, which is great. All right. So that's the benefit of this care, is that we think it's a permanent change. However, just to recognize that everything feeds into everything. So every injury you've ever had adds to the matrix. And if we don't clear some of those big patterns, it will tend to reestablish itself over time because we have electrical interference. We have neurological influence from head injuries and spinal injuries that can feed back over time. So we try to get people into a series of at least 4 to 6 sessions closer together to break that cycle. But once that's done, then it's full steam ahead in most cases. Does that help, Carol? Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you. Thanks, great question. Very important. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of the difficulty is that we can't measure it directly. We have to hypothesize based on what's happening in the electromagnetic field with the stuck energy and then the introduction of electron flow, either through our hands or through this.
I believe there may be ways we could measure this if we had electromyographic studies, for example, and you check. I did this years ago with a microcurrent device, which was also monitoring resistance, and we noticed an improvement in conductivity, but there's so many confounding factors there with galvanic skin response and so on. That's can be very confusing. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, but bone changes we can measure, and other changes physiologically, so normalization of liver enzymes, we know. Things like that, improvement in blood pressure, cardiac rhythm changes, and also brain indirect neurological.
That's great. Wonderful.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of people talking about the baby's head. So probably we could, that could probably be an entire.
Sure, and we treat newborns, and I've treated 4-day-olds, and I'll tell you, we see a significant issues during the birthing process. And even there are injuries, and Steve talked about this at one time, I remember, to me, because we look at, things like club foot and deformities we see in babies' skulls, how they're positioned in the uterus, the forces generated inside the uterus, the body has to respond to that in some way. And to me, that creates a micro trauma over time, which still can have an influence after birth. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Lisa Babiak, did you want to unmute and come on camera and ask your question? Or
sure.
I can ask it for you, but it'd be nice if you.
Okay, I will. Thanks, Susan. George, I'm wondering if you notice a difference in working with high performance athletes compared to non-athletes.
I've worked quite a bit with high performance athletes, Olympic athletes. One of our students, a Matrix practitioner, is now working with the Canadian downhill freestyle ski team. And I also currently working with Doug Smith, who's his website is Doug Smith Performance. He wrote a book called The Trauma Code. And so yes, it's amazing to me. I've learned the most from high performance athletes because they're not focused on pain. They're focused on performance. And so they're not going to be satisfied just being out of pain. You have to show measurable change in muscle strength, joint function, stability, flexibility, all of those factors. And so I've been pushed to my greatest discoveries through working with them. All right. So absolutely 100%. Best training lab. Do you work with them as well? You work with high performance?
I do. Yeah. Mostly baseball and hockey.
Right.
And it's hard to transition them from the linear training systems that they're used to and how they approach pain and injury and performance too. Yeah. So it's a little bit of a shift.
The beauty, I'll tell you one note on that. The beauty of this work is by actually applying the magnets, even temporarily, we can create an instantaneous improvement in mobility, muscle tone, and joint stability, like within seconds. So they know even before we treat them that the potential is there. So there's absolutely no need to convince them. You can talk all you want, but if you don't show them the improvement, forget about it, right?
Yeah.
So that's why we've been able to do that. Yeah.
And Lisa's primarily working, I think, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, with younger athletes, high school.
Sure, but you want to show the parents. You'll be able to show the parents. If you can show the parents, the buy-in is almost instantaneous. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, George.
You're welcome.
Okay. Let's have Carol Boggs come on and ask her question.
Can I just comment on concussion for one more minute?
Yeah, please, please.
So one of our students, an occupational therapist from Alaska, she actually was in her entire educational program was interrupted through a serious concussion. And she was treated by one of my students in Minneapolis and was able to finish her qualification. So she's now a Matrix practitioner. And one of her thesis was done on using Matrix Repatterning to treat facial blindness. And so she was able to restore facial recognition in this patient. And I mentioned this thesis literally at a next seminar, and I presented the thesis that she had presented, which is part of our training. And a student put up her hand. She said she was there from Halifax because her chiropractor did Matrix on her, cured her facial blindness. And I'd never even realized that we could do that before. So it was kind of an interesting, and it was head injuries, of course, which.
So facial blindness, you look at different faces.
Yeah, you can't differentiate between faces. She would have to go to the office and literally ask the receptionist who that was. She didn't recognize him from one treatment to the next. And actually, interestingly, Oliver Sacks had facial blindness. And Oliver Sacks wrote the foreword to Norman Doidge's first book.
Yes.
So he commented on that as well. So unfortunately, he's gone, but I think we could have helped.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, Carol Boggs is going to come on and ask you a question.
That was great, George. I was especially taken with your speaking about magnets, and I just recently started using bone conduction headphones, which rely on magnets. Should I not be doing that?
Well, there's a simple way for you to test anything. I'll show you guys a simple way you can test any device, and this will apply to cell phones. I'll tell you, people wearing these electronic watches, Fitbits and everything, you are creating serious issues here because it's not biocompatible. So what you can do is this, Carol. So I'm gonna step back here for a moment, and it's in my book, but I show you how to do this. So for example, what you can do is, let's say you're seated, and you can try this technique yourself. Just put a gentle bit of pressure into the quadriceps. I got my hand on my thigh here, and I'm just going to ease into it. I'm just going to ease into it until I feel like an equal pushback and see how far it lets you in. Okay. We call that the barrier. A lot of you have done myofascial work. This is not new to you, but this is basically a way to measure the tissue resistance in one part of the body. So next thing, just get a sense of how deep that is. Often it's good to do that with the eyes closed in order to get a sensitivity to the depth. Then take any device. So for example, if I take my cell phone, all right, and I place it, if I hold it, right, and I test that same thing again, okay, I'll find I can't go in as far, okay? And so if I put it aside, put it at least a couple of feet away. So any device you have, put it near test it with that device, put aside, then get it, see how far it goes in. The eyes closed is helpful. Bring it into your proximity, test it again, okay? And you'll see a difference. Great. The problem nowadays, we have another big problem with the magnetic fields right now. And for those of you who don't realize it, we are in the midst of what's called a polar reversal. Is anyone? Yeah, our poles are reversing right now. It's a huge event, happens every several 100,000 years. We're in the middle of a significant one. It's accelerating rapidly. What precedes every polar reversal is a rapid decline in the magnetic field of the Earth. So the beautiful nutritive effect of the magnetic field of the Earth is now significantly diminished. By some estimates, it's 30% of what it was 400 years ago. And on top of that, we have all these artificial fields that we've created, like crazy. Like smartphones are insane, smart television sets. I have to turn off my smart television, so the power off. I stupidly put one in my bedroom and I couldn't sleep. And I said, what the heck's going on? So I put a switch on it now so that uncouples it from the power because it's constantly looking for a signal, right? So these things are very, very powerful devices. So another device that I've been developing, because I couldn't do our work, but I found I was having challenges picking up these bioelectric signals. And the magnets were helpful. And sometimes we'd have to place a magnet on the body just to neutralize it, which does work, but it's a little cumbersome. So I've created what's called a safe zone technology. It's a powerful Schumann generator that using Tesla coils that transmits it to a large area. So we now have them, all our practitioners starting to use them in their offices because, patients are using them to mitigate those fields, and doesn't block the field, but it literally helps to overcome the biological effects of it. All right. But something we have to realize that we're exposed to this. And I'm very worried about 5G, I'll be honest with you, and Tesla's, not Tesla, but Musk's, this big space link thing that he's doing. We're going to have a hard time with this. And we have to realize that we are bioelectric, structural, conducting creatures, and all life on the planet depends on this bioelectric environment that we're living in. And it's polluting, basically it's electromagnetic pollution, right, that we're facing. So anyhow.
All right.
I'll keep you posted on those. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, that's all. I'll keep you posted on that. I literally have a meeting right after this with the guy who's going to help start building these. We have a beta test going on now with these devices. I've had people testing them in their homes, and they come back after the test to return the device, and they don't want to give it up. They can't believe the changes in anxiety and sleep and everything else they're noticing. So it's been pretty gratifying to see that it's actually helping.
I think at this point, everybody can, if you want, turn your cameras back on.
I apologize. I took too long. I hope I.
No, it was great material. It's wonderful. And I'm wondering, Elizabeth Larkham, you've got a question. And can you also just give us a little overview of what you've got going on over in your Moved to Learn world, and ask your question as well. Are you there, Elizabeth?
I am, Susan. Thank you so much for the option to chime in. My question was really what George just spoke about. Maybe he just mentioned the answer to it. I asked if the Safe Zone technology devices are available for purchase by non-practitioners, but it sounds like
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we sell them to our patients, but unfortunately we've only started now, so they're going to be available again probably within the next 2 months. If you contact my my assistant, you can contact us at probably reception at matrixinstitute.net, I believe. Okay. They will have the information, or just contact, you can just contact me
through the
directly.
website.
Through the website. Yeah, through the website. If you contact there, the contact information is there, matrixrepatterning.com. Just ask about that, and we'll put you on the mailing list to make sure you get updated on that information. Yeah, but it won't be too long, because I know people have been clamoring for it. I've got, unfortunately, way too much going on in my life right now. So I thankfully have an amazing team who's taking it on, but there's still challenges. Yeah.
Lisa's going to find the link and put it in the chat. Elizabeth, tell us a little about what's coming up in the Handspring and Move to Learn world.
Thank you so much, Susan, for the opportunity. The next event with the Handspring Move to Learn webinar is a celebration of the second edition publication of Fascia in Sport and Movement. And the co-editors of this book, Robert Schleip and Jan Wilke, are going to be our guests. Of course, it's a celebration of that second edition on Wednesday, May 14. And the opportunity will be for both co-editors to present the most recent research in the fascia world that has the benefits of transforming manual therapy and movement education in sport and movement, but of course it's in all of our lives. So thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Elizabeth. And of course, all these things interrelate in such interesting ways. I'm so happy that, COVID's been horrible, but it has brought out and brought together so many people from these linked communities. I was part of a great discussion on Clubhouse last night with Fran Phillip and Julian Baker and Chris. I'm going to mess up Chris's last name. Yeah, I'm not even going to try. Sorry, Chris. He's here in Washington, D.C. But anyway, they have a fascia quest group on Clubhouse. So I'm just really happy. Now, I'm not seeing other questions in the chat. Is there anybody who, and thank you, Elizabeth, again. So if anybody does have a question, maybe we can go into sort
We've
of.
got Gregory's hand up, Susan.
Oh, okay, great.
And then Diane, were you putting your hand up or no? Okay.
I see Neo had his hand up there as well.
Okay, so why don't we do Gregory and then Neil?
I think it was Neo. Someone named
That
Neo.
is me. Yep, that's
you.
me.
Oh, Gregory, you okay?
Oh, that's you. Okay, I see Neo on there. Okay.
Uh-huh.
George, I just wanted to ask your take on, I know there's not a lot of research on it, but with everything you shared with us today on bone, what have you found as far as, or what have you experienced as far as like regrowing or regenerating bone tissue, cartilage tissue, that sort of thing?
Well, bone tissue for sure. I showed you a slide of this young lady who for 5 years had degenerative changes in her bone. They basically were giving up on her, right? And so definitely we can make changes like that. My belief is in the research for articular tissue, and I know Steve has talked about, how joint structures, basically there's never any compressive forces, but I believe that when these bone changes take place and you lose stability, there are some frictional forces that cause degeneration of the cartilage, which I could look at, I sort of allude to as a solid lubricant. But if you restore the bone size back to normal and you restore that stability relationship where they're tracking properly and they're not creating friction, studies I know, I can't refer to specifically, there were studies done on rats where they scraped off the articular cartilage and it did grow back. I believe it's constantly being regenerated, okay, as the tissue is broken down. But with the deformity, with the changes in bone and this instability, it's breaking down faster than it's regenerating, right? So I believe by restoring the structure and the stability, you can potentially regenerate. You see that in people who've been able to avoid hip surgery and knee surgery. So we see that many, many times. And so I believe it's possible. Again, studies need to be done in that area.
That is great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right, great. And that was Chris Rodusakis, whose name I was trying to remember. And he's here in DC, a PT here in DC. So anyway, now some people might have their hands up and I don't have myself situated so I can see that very.
I see Michelle's hand is up.
Oh, great. Michelle, please jump in, because this is very much related to your bone awareness work.
Yeah. For me, it's really very heartful to hear you, George, from my friend's country. And I work on bones for a long time, and I do what I call a bone awakening. And it's something which happened during my dance explorations. And first, I met the bones during a kind of travel inside myself. And I began to give percussion to my bones and feel something like a call of my bones and asking me to go on and have conversations with them. Mm-hmm. So for a long time, for 30 years, I've observed different things. And when I did a cartography, as you described, because I know mechanical link osteopath creator, who is Paul Chauffour.
Very, yeah, wonderful.
You know him?
Oh, very much, of course. Studied with him.
And it's a friend of me. And
Lien Mécanique. Yeah.
Oui.
Oui.
And we had a lot of conversation about his discover and what he called balancing and equilibration between two.
Exactly. No, I give him full credit in my book. He was amazing. Is he still around? Is he still alive?
Now he's working on animals.
Okay.
So he has applied to animals his theory and practices.
Yeah,
and
I do a lot of work with animals as well, horses.
Yes, yes. And I should like to know if you work on animals sometimes.
Absolutely. I love work. I actually prefer working on animals, to be honest with you. It was years ago, I had a patient come who's a veterinarian, and I treated her and she wanted to learn the technique. So she took my course, but then she said, now you have to come with me to the racetrack. I spent 6 months with her at the Woodbine racetrack in Toronto and developed a technique for horses. That's been almost 30 years now. And I work with Olympic horses and dressage and jumpers, and I love it. Yeah, so it's something we've had 10 or 11 veterinarians now take the program. So we're trying to develop a veterinary program now for treating animals. Yes, it's wonderful.
Yes,
they respond so beautifully. Yeah,
it goes very quick with animals.
They respond more quickly than humans often.
Yes,
because they don't have the limiting beliefs.
Yeah,
we do. I have to actually get people to break free of the fear. They saw the X-rays, they saw the reports, and so their mind is limiting them to create tension. And animals don't have that, so I have to. No, it's amazing. Yeah.
Yes, it's marvelous. Yeah. So thank you. It was very strong for me too.
C'est mon plaisir.
And Michelle will be back with us on May 14th. And that's going to be our first bilingual French and English Biotensegrity party. So that's something to look forward to. Thank you. Barbara Rosamilla, I can't remember where you're coming in from, so remind us, but we have you up next.
Oh, hi, I don't have a question. I am in Minnesota and I've been using Matrix Repatterning for 3 years exclusively in my office. And I was brought into it by a friend who was extremely persistent and would tell me these fantastic stories about what was going on in his office. And I thought, yeah, I like you, but this can't be true. But he was convincing and I got a treatment. And my first treatment, I thought, well, what the heck? What is going on here? I became fascinated. It's a paradigm shift. Every day is exciting at work. And the changes that happen are profound. And I just wanted to offer that because it's just the latest, greatest, cool thing ever.
Hi, Barb. Yeah, it's nice to hear from practitioners who experience that because I've had so many practitioners. I have practitioners in their 70s and one actually in their early 80s who took the course after years of doing conventional care like chiropractic or physical therapy and so on. And it's a new lease on life because first of all, it's way easier on their bodies, and it's so gratifying because you see those changes so quickly. So I'm just delighted. Thanks for that, Barb, because I love sharing this and I love seeing that other people are being helped because everyone needs the application of biotensegrity to help their health. And this is one way we can do that. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Barbara. Your hand was up, so just so you know, that's great. Thanks. May Kessler, are you there? Did you want to ask your question?
Hi, how is everybody? Thank you. Yeah, I was really curious. I mean, I love what you said in it. Being a dancer and working on this all the time, I see so many changes having to do with just how I even sense neurologically, introspectively what's going on. But my big question is I have scoliosis, but also osteoporosis. And since you showed that bone healed on that x-ray, I was wondering if there's any information you have about how it affects osteoporosis.
Yeah, osteoporosis is a complex diagnosis. It's often misinterpreted, in my opinion. but it also reflects a physiological change to bone, which is a reflection of mineral imbalance, in my opinion, in most cases, and hormonal imbalance or other factors. So it doesn't directly affect general bone function. It'll address those areas which are often localized. But here's the thing. When you get a bone density result, you'll often see a big discrepancy between the lumbar and the hip is what they measure those two areas. When you see that kind of discrepancy, you got to ask yourself, why is that? And that's often because there is more of an injury in one area than the other. I see that often with those reports. In the old days, like 20, 30 years ago, they used to look at the heel, they used to look at the wrist, they looked at all these other areas, and they started narrowing it down. And literally overnight, they doubled the prescription rate for medication because the lumbar, spine, and hip are very vulnerable to injury. So your diagnosis may be somewhat erroneous based on local injuries. So one of the clues is the discrepancy between the amount of density between those two structures. All right. So it really has to be evaluated. I recommend looking at nutritional factors and, speaking to an integrative medicine practitioner. The medications are horrible. They're osteoclast inhibitors. They're really dangerous. But normal improved mineralization, improved digestion, hydrochloric acid production in the stomach to help absorb minerals, getting trace minerals so the body doesn't deplete the calcium reserves in searching for it by mining the skeleton. There are a lot of factors here that come into play, but I recommend speaking to a naturopath or someone like that to address those issues, and then looking at other structural issues if there is a discrepancy. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
Can we, Diane Woodruff, you have a question. Are you there?
There, now I am.
Great.
Yes, my question has to do with how you follow up with your clients. Do you provide them with a movement program? What role does that kind of thing play in the continuing recovery using your techniques?
Yes, well, absolutely. I think, in my book, I have a series of exercises at the back to generate basic isotonic and isometric activity. Any kind of, isotonic, isometric weight-bearing exercise is helpful to help improve physiology of bone structure, for example. But I believe that there are also some self-help techniques that can help people manage day-to-day injuries that happen all the time. You bump into a piece of furniture, you sprain your ankle, you fall on your outstretched hand. All of these generate injuries that are absorbed into the body. And I think, helping to address those early on is really a significant help. But my background, I trained in Tai Chi and karate and yoga. All of those things are incredibly helpful. And I feel they generate that microcurrent in the body when they're applied properly. To me, Tai Chi and some of the martial arts and even yoga are actually generating that intrinsic bioelectric, piezoelectric effect. Okay, so
Absolutely.
I believe that all of those exercises are of benefit, and you can apply them in a targeted way if you know how you injured yourself as well.
I remember going into a health food store years ago, and they were selling some special bone vitamin combo, and they had a bone density test there. So I hopped, on the thing and did the bone density test, and they came back, and they had this whole thing where they say, okay, here's your age, here's the average bone density, and then you get older and older, and your density goes down, 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 down. This is in relating to the osteoporosis question as well. Anyway, and
I just want to caution people on one more thing with osteoporosis.
Yeah.
Beware calcium carbonate. The form of calcium literally neutralizes your hydrochloric acid production, and you will not absorb anything, including calcium. All right. So it's very crucial to avoid that and look for a better source. But calcium is only part of the problem. Look at the trace minerals, get that evaluation done, because it's usually a deficiency of trace minerals. Right.
Well, so anyway, so I got they got the bone density. No, it's good. Thank you. That's valuable. they came back with the bone density results, and they said, how old are you? And I told them, and they said, what are you doing? I said, Tai Chi. So, and I know that now the studies are out there that show this. So it's really interesting how much we don't know, how much we have to learn. Who knows where we'll be in 5 or 10 years. Patricia Hopper has a question. So maybe she's...
The declining magnetic field is an issue too.
Yeah.
That's why I believe we have to compensate for that. We have to help to support our bioelectric fields. Yeah.
In the face of that change.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. We know that's why astronauts decline. Their skeletal framework just diminishes, being further and further away from the magnetic field of the Earth. Even with artificial weight-bearing exercise, they still come back with significant bone loss.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Patricia?
Yeah, this is such a great presentation. Thank you. My question kind of has 2 parts. The first part is just a clarification to make sure that I'm understanding you right. So when you were presenting your results, my impression was that when you measure the bones before and after treatment, that consistently the bone is larger before treatment and smaller after treatment. Is that correct?
In most cases, yeah. There are cases where there's been damage to the growth center. So we try to differentiate that. So people falling on their knees, for example, very common, they can injure the tibial or the femoral growth center. Other growth centers can be affected as well. That young lady, by the way, damaged her growth center when she was an infant. That's why they artificially broke her leg to start with, but it never healed properly. And they were trying to lengthen the bone using a technique to stretch the bone, but it could not recover. So she was suffering immensely. So yeah, we can differentiate bone length decline due to growth center, but in most cases, without that injury, it'll always get bigger, essentially, unless it's fractured. Fracturing and misalignment of reduction can cause a shortening, but that's that's only after a fracture.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if that answers the question, or do you have more?
Yeah, that starts too. And then I'm also just curious if you see a corresponding pattern in the softer tissue. I got the impression you were presenting bone images because that's what's easiest to measure, but I'm also curious about your own theories about what patterns of change happen in the softer tissue that corresponds to what you showed us in the bone.
Very good.
Both either with injury or with healing, or both.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. So any bone change, the framework, imagine the framework kind of expanding and distorting. All of the fascial structures around that will try to have to adapt to it. There are local injuries, though. The deep soft tissues, the fascia around the organs is very vulnerable as well. But whenever you change the deeper structures, the soft tissues have to accommodate it. Local soft tissue injuries directly to muscle can have a local effect, where you get, almost like adhesive pathologies that take place that John Barnes talks about. But unless you correct the deeper framework, a bone injury will continue to impose itself on the soft tissues. So you have to look at both aspects. But if you don't correct the frame, you're constantly fighting that battle, because it just simply, it's like taking a bow, and the bowstring, the bow is too tight. It's not going to allow that soft tissue to accommodate properly. So it's really important to address both. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. George, can you tell us the osteopath that you mentioned, you and Michelle, when the two
Paul
of you...
Paul Chauffour, Chauffour, and the technique is called mechanical link. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Perhaps Michelle would write that in the chat for people.
Let's spell it one more time. CHAU?
AUFFOUR.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Mechanical link.
Correct.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, we are getting ready to wind up here. I want everyone, especially those of you listening on YouTube, to know that in 2 weeks, we're going to have a special episode, which will not be on YouTube because it's going to feature some cadaveric images, and it just gets too tricky. And we want to preserve privacy and all of that. So protocol requires this, and that's going to be April 23rd. If you, that's going to be with John Sharkey and Joanne Avison.
Just interrupt, Susan. It's April 16th. April 16th.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's April 16th. That's Graham. Thank you for that correction. I appreciate it. So what you can do is go to biotensegrityarchive.org and get on the email list, and then you'll get a registration. You'll the the email goes out about every Wednesday, and you'll get the registration link a few days before for that episode. So that would be the way to participate on the 16th of April.
And for those of you who are here on Zoom, I know a lot of your friends will be interested in joining us. If you've been recommending the YouTube, please also share our newsletter link, because we would love to have them here. And it's a great opportunity. Sorry, Graham. Go for it.
Just want to say that hopefully the Zoom recording will be available for a few days afterwards, so you won't necessarily have to watch it on the live. So you'll be able to watch it a few days later.
Yes, we think we figured out how to be able to do that. Thanks for mentioning that. Next week, Anna Outsubo is going to be our guest co-host, and we're going to have another bilingual Portuguese-English episode focusing on the biotensegrity movement in Brazil. We're going to have Sergio Fonseca with us, and he is, I don't know, he goes back a long time with you, Steve, I know. And we're also going to have Marfa Martin present. So please join us for that. And we, if we don't have anything else to announce, I think we'll go to sponsors.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Well, I gave you a list of talked about our sponsors at the beginning. I'm going to quickly run through a summary of them. Note that our sponsors are truly global. We have the USA, Canada, Spain, Brazil, and Holland at the moment. I'm sure we'll get a few more. So Handspring Publishing, who have a wide range of authors and books available for movement and manual therapy professionals. Embodied Biotensegrity, whose 14-day free membership trial is only available until this Monday. So if you subscribe over the weekend, you can attend the next book club, which is next Wednesday, the 7th of April, on the unreasonable effectiveness of light touch with Leonid Bliam. Artifact Pro in Madrid, Spain, who produce wonderful tensegrity models. Also Pretensed in Holland, who produce a different range of tensegrities. So they've both got exciting things to look at. We have Matrix Repatterning with George Roth, who produces a range of courses, and also Integrated Biotensegrity in Alberta, Canada, who all produce a range of different courses. The Biotensegrity Congress from Brazil on April 23rd to 25th, and the Fascia Hub on the 8th of May with John Sharkey, Wilbur Kelsick, Elizabeth Larkham, Philip Beach, and Rachel Tudor on the fascial foot. So there's our sponsors.
So much going on. It's really wonderful. George, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I have so much longed to be hearing more about your work. I look forward to the day when people who are not qualified to take the actual certification, but who just want the self-care aspect can do so, because I'm not a therapist, and I thank you for that effort personally. And we are going to turn it over to George for the closing toast.
Well, I want to thank everyone for their really insightful questions and, share the excitement with all of you. For those practitioners out there, I did put a note on the chat. There's going to be an introductory program in June. So if you're interested, just check out our website. So anyway, to all of you and to your continuing efforts, and to Steve, of course, thank you all, and wish you well.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Gambe.
Cheers all. Thank you.